The thing about family brunches is that everyone arrives already knowing what they think of you. They don't need new information. They've already filed you somewhere under a category, a label, a quiet disappointment, and everything you say or do just gets sorted into that existing folder. My family had a folder for me. It had been building for about 2 years, and by the time I sat down at that table last October, the folder was thick. My name is Nadia. I'm 24 years old, and 18 months before that brunch, I had turned down a full scholarship to study business at a state university to instead sit in my childhood bedroom and build something from scratch. I know how that sounds. My mother had cried. Not the kind of crying you do at graduations or weddings, the kind you do when you're genuinely scared for someone. My father had gone quiet, which was worse. He has this way of going silent that fills a room more than shouting ever could. He looked at me the way you look at a car that won't start. Not angry, just resigned. But it was my uncle Desmond who had the most to say. Desmond is my mother's older brother. He's a district manager for a mid-size retail chain, drives a company car, wears polo shirts with small logos on the chest, and considers himself the authority on practical success. He is not a cruel man. He's something more stubborn than cruel. He is certain about how the world works. Certain about what success looks like. Certain that any deviation from that picture is either stupidity or arrogance. At that first brunch, the one where I told them I was skipping college, Desmond laughed. Not a mean laugh. Almost worse, a sympathetic one, the kind adults give children who announce they want to be astronauts. So, what exactly is the plan, Nadia? He said, cutting into his French toast. You're going to do what? Sell things online, make content. What is this? I'm building a brand consulting firm, I said. Specifically for small e-commerce businesses that can't afford agency rates. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when you've already stopped listening. My cousin Priya, Desmond's daughter, 1 year older than me, currently finishing a marketing degree, smiled without showing her teeth. That's so cool that you're trying that, she said. It's good to have goals. The table moved on. Someone asked about my grandmother's doctor's appointment. Someone else complained about the drive. I sat there with my eggs going cold and understood, with complete clarity, that no one at that table believed I would amount to anything outside of eventually coming back around to the right path. That was 18 months ago. I didn't go back around. What I actually built, and I'll explain this more in a minute because it matters, started with a single client, a woman named Taruko, who ran a handmade ceramic store on Etsy and was doing about $800 a month in revenue. She'd found me through a forum post I'd written about product photography on a budget. She couldn't afford the $3,000 retainer that agencies wanted. She offered me $400 to overhaul her brand voice, her product descriptions, and her email sequence. I took it. I worked on her account for 3 weeks. I rewrote everything. I built her a simple content calendar, repositioned her brand from handmade goods to slow-living objects for intentional homes, and coached her through a relaunch. Within 60 days, she was at $6,200 a month. She referred me to 2 other clients. Those 2 referred me to 3 more. I built a small process, then a methodology, then a framework I could license. I raised my rates. I hired a part-time contractor to handle client onboarding. I moved off Etsy sellers into Shopify stores, then into product-based businesses with real inventory. By the time of that second brunch, the one I want to tell you about, I was running a small but legitimate consulting operation bringing in just over $18,000 a month in recurring revenue. I had 7 active clients, 1 part-time employee, and a waiting list. I had not told my family any of this, not out of spite or not entirely out of spite, partly because they hadn't asked. In 18 months, through Christmas dinners and birthday calls and group chats, not one person in my family had asked me a sincere question about what I was building. They asked if I was doing okay. They asked if I was still doing the online thing. Desmond once asked if I'd thought any more about going back to school. Nobody asked what my revenue was. Nobody asked how many clients I had. Nobody treated it like a real business. So, I stopped trying to explain it like one. I just kept building. The brunch last Sunday was at my grandmother's house in Raleigh. Her name is Odette and she is 71 years old and sharper than anyone in that family will ever be. She grew up in a small town in Louisiana, moved north at 19 with $40 and a suitcase, and built a life entirely through the force of her own judgment. She doesn't perform wisdom, she just has it quietly and dispenses it. At moments you don't expect. I hadn't seen her in 4 months. When I walked in, she hugged me for a long time and then held me at arm's length and looked at my face the way only grandmothers can. Like she was reading something the rest of the world couldn't see. "You look settled," she said. Not happy, not successful. Settled, like she could see that I had found solid ground. The table filled up. My parents, Desmond and his wife, Carolyn. Priya, who had graduated in the spring and recently started an entry-level coordinator role at a marketing firm. My younger brother, Kofi, who's 18 and studying engineering. 2 of my grandmother's church friends, who I've known my whole life. Brunch went the way brunch always goes. Food passed around. Conversations about weather and health and neighborhood news. Desmond talked for a while about a promotion he was up for. Priya mentioned that her company worked with some pretty major brands. My mother talked about a home renovation project. I ate my food, and listened and felt as I always do at that table slightly outside the glass. And then my grandmother put down her fork. She does this thing when she wants to redirect a room. She doesn't raise her voice. She just stops making any sound at all. And somehow the table feels it and quiets down to match her. "Nadia," she said, "I want you to tell me what you do." The table shifted, not dramatically, just a small collective adjustment like everyone recalibrating. "Tell me like I don't know anything about business," she said. "Because I don't, but I want to understand it." I looked at her. I looked at the table. Desmond had a faint half-smile. The "this should be interesting" expression of a man who expected me to fumble. Priya was looking at her mimosa. My mother had gone still. I took a breath. I help small product businesses figure out why people aren't buying from them. I said, usually, it's not the product. It's the way they're presenting it, the story they're telling about it or not telling. I come in, diagnose the problem, rewrite the brand language, restructure how they talk to customers, and help them build systems that run without them having to post on social media every single day. My grandmother nodded slowly. "And does it work?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I measure it. I track revenue before I start and after. Every client I've worked with has grown. The smallest growth was 40% over 90 days. The largest was one client who went from $4,000 a month to $31,000 over 8 months. The table was quiet, not the polite quiet of people waiting for their turn to speak. A different kind of quiet. "And how many clients do you have?" My grandmother asked. 7 active right now. I have a waiting list." "A waiting list," she repeated, not with surprise, with something more like satisfaction, like a woman who'd suspected a thing and was now being confirmed. Desmond cleared his throat. "I mean, that's good, Nadia, but how stable is it really? These are small businesses. What happens if a few of them drop off?" It was a reasonable question dressed in the clothes of doubt. I'd heard that voice for 18 months. "That's why I moved to retainer contracts," I said. "Clients pay monthly for ongoing brand support, content review, strategy check-ins, seasonal campaign planning. My churn over the last 6 months has been one client, and they left because they scaled enough to bring someone in-house, which they told me was because of the growth we built together." Another silence. Priya looked up from her mimosa. Something had shifted in her expression. Not hostility, just recalculation. She was doing the math. I could see it. "What do you charge?" she asked. "It depends on the engagement. My base retainer starts at $2,200 a month per client." Per client. She didn't say anything after that. Here's what I want to tell you about what happened next because it wasn't dramatic. That's the part people always expect. The confrontation, the apology, the moment where someone says, "I was wrong about you." And everyone cries. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter and I think more true. After brunch, while people were moving to the living room and my grandmother's church friends were washing dishes, Desmond came and stood next to me by the kitchen counter. He poured himself more coffee. He didn't look at me right away. You're really doing well, he said finally. The really was doing work in that sentence, like he needed it to bridge the gap between what he'd assumed and what he now knew. I am, I said. I didn't soften it. I didn't say I've been lucky or it's still early days. I just said I am. He nodded, sipped his coffee. Your framework thing, is that something you sell separately? It's part of the license package I'm developing. Could that scale? Like, could you train other people to deliver it? And there it was. The shift from skeptic to curious. From the man who laughed at me at a breakfast table to the man standing in his mother's kitchen asking me how to think about my business model. I answered him genuinely and without condescension because I actually have no interest in making people feel small. That was never the point. The point was never revenge. The point was proof. Before I left, my grandmother found me near the door. She pressed my hand between both of hers. She's done this my whole life. This specific gesture that means she's about to say something she means. I always knew you had something, she said. I just didn't know what shape it would take. I thought about the 18 months, the loneliness of building in silence, the family dinners where I smiled through quiet dismissal, the moments late at night when doubt felt like it had weight and mass and was sitting directly on my chest. I wasn't sure either for a while, I told her. But you kept going. I kept going. She squeezed my hand once and let it go. On the drive home, I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because I think that's the part that matters. I didn't feel like I'd won something. I felt like I'd finished something. Like a door I'd been holding open with my shoulder for a year and a half had finally quietly closed on its own. Not because I'd forced it, just because enough time had passed and enough work had been done and the truth had simply arrived at the table and sat down and spoken for itself. Priya texted me that night. It said, "Hey, would you ever want to grab coffee? I have some questions about what you do. No pressure." I read it twice. Then I texted back, "Yeah, I'd like that. Because here's the thing about proof. The real kind. The kind that comes from 18 months of quiet work in a bedroom while everyone else is laughing. It doesn't need you to be bitter. It doesn't need you to remind people of what they said. It just needs you to have done the work. The rest takes care of itself."